Before we begin, drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching. Whether it's sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France, I want to know. Don't just sit back. Tell me where in the world you are. Now let's dive into the story. The chain bit into her wrists as the moon rose. Not gently, not kindly. It tore light from the sky and poured it down on her like judgment. Alawan Vale stood barefoot in the stone circle, mud clinging to her calves, breath shaking as the crowd closed in. Someone spat. Someone laughed. The silver collar burned her throat where it pressed, etched with old runes she did not know but felt deep in her bones. The high priest lifted his staff and called her name, the way one might name a sacrifice, not a bride. Her sister stood behind him, cloaked in white, eyes dry. The words rang out, "Moonbound Bride," and the people recoiled as if cursed. Chosen by the wolf god, they said, as if chosen meant blessed. Alawan felt only terror. The ground pulsed. The air tasted metallic. A howl cut through the valley, ancient, vast, and the crowd fell silent. The chain jerked tight. The wolf god had answered. They shoved her forward, and memory split her open. The night snapped backward to the first brews of betrayal, when the valley still felt safe, and the name Vale meant shelter. Alawan remembered the river road, the smell of pine resin and cold water, the way she ran messages for coin because hunger teaches speed. Her father's hands were always cracked, her mother's eyes always tired. She remembered how her sister, Marid, learned to smile in rooms with power, how white silk replaced mud on her hems. When the priests began whispering of signs, of a moon that lingered too long, of wolves circling without attacking, Marid was praised for calm. Alawan was warned to stay quiet. The first mark appeared on Alawan's shoulder at 13, a pale crescent that throbbed on full moons. They said it meant misfortune. They said it must be watched. She learned to hide it with cloth and shame, to swallow fear like dry bread. The choosing was never supposed to be hers. That was the lie they told her until it broke. The ceremony day arrived with bells and banners, Marid crowned in pearl and frost blue lace. Alawan watched from the edge, hands raw from scrubbing floors, when the sky dimmed as if bruised. The wolves came then, silent shapes at the tree line, eyes catching fire. The high priest faltered, the staff cracked against stone. Wind tore through the circle, ripping veils, dragging breath from lungs. Alawan's mark burned, and the ground answered her pulse. A voice, no, a presence, pressed against her mind, patient and endless. You. She tried to run. Silverbit skin. The crowd's awe curdled into fear. Mared screamed that it was a mistake, that Alawan had always been wrong. The priest nodded, relieved. Better the quiet sister. Better the expendable one. They bound Alawan and called it destiny. Now beneath the moon, the wolf god drew closer. Not as a beast, not as a man, as something between breath and shadow, heat and winter, eyes like starlit ice. Alawan's knees buckled, but she did not beg. The chain hummed, alive. The presence wrapped her thoughts in velvet and steel. Images flashed, forests unburned, children laughing without fear, a crown of bone and moonlight. Chosen is not owned, the presence said without words. Chosen is claimed to protect. The crowd did not hear this. They only saw her shaking and called it proof of weakness. Mared watched with something like relief. The high priest raised the knife. The moon flared brighter. Alawan lifted her head, tears streaking dirt, and met the wolf god's gaze. For the first time, the fear cracked. Something else stirred. Anger, bright and clean. The knife fell. The chain shattered. Stone exploded outward in a ring of white fire. Alawan screamed, not in pain, but in release, as the mark on her shoulder bloomed into living light. The wolves howled as one. The presence surged, not consuming, but standing beside her, vast and steady. The high priest was thrown back, staff splintering. The crowd scattered, faith breaking into footsteps. Elowyn stood in the crater, breath ragged, eyes burning silver. The wolf god's voice settled into her chest like a promise and a warning. Bride, you will walk a harder road than death. They will hunt you. They will need you. Choose who you become. In the chaos, Myrid vanished. The moon climbed higher, indifferent. Elowyn took her first step out of the circle, free and marked, knowing the valley would never forgive her, and that she would never kneel again. Dawn broke thin and gray over the valley, as if the sun itself hesitated to look at what had happened. Elowyn moved through the forest with blistered feet and borrowed breath, the air sharp with pine and wet stone. Every sound felt louder, now, the snap of twigs, the rush of distant water, her own heartbeat drumming like a warning. She did not know where she was going, only that she could not stop. The wolf god's presence lingered, not a voice, but a weight of awareness that steadied her steps when fear tried to turn her back. When she reached the ravine, she slipped on moss and fell hard, scraping her palms raw. Pain grounded her. She pressed her forehead to the earth and breathed until the shaking eased. The mark on her shoulder dimmed, warm instead of burning, as if listening. Hunger gnawed. Cold crept in. She wrapped herself in resolve and kept moving, unaware of eyes tracking her from the ridge above. The story of how it began came back in fragments, carried by the smell of smoke and memory. Elowyn remembered her mother's quiet songs at dusk, the way she counted coins twice before buying bread. She remembered learning early that kindness did not feed you unless paired with work. When her father died beneath a fallen beam, the valley offered condolences and nothing more. Myrid learned to smile sharper after that, to choose dresses over duties. Elowyn learned routes and shortcuts, how to carry news and keep secrets. The priests noticed Myrid's poise and praised it as virtue. They noticed Elowyn's silence and called it odd. On nights when wolves howled, Elowyn's mark warmed, and she would stand by the window, palms pressed to glass, heart aching with a pull she did not understand. She never told anyone. In the valley, truths that could not be used against you were still dangerous. By noon, rain cut through the forest, fine and cold. Elowyn found a cave tucked behind a curtain of ivy, small but dry. She crouched inside, wrapping her arms around her knees, watching droplets bead and fall like counted seconds. The presence stirred. Not command, invitation. Images slid through her mind, hands shaping fire, breath sinking with wind, feet finding balance on slick stone. She tried to ignore it, but when she listened, her breathing slowed. The ache in her chest eased. She practiced until the rain softened and the forest seemed to lean closer, curious rather than hostile. When she stepped back outside, a figure blocked the path. Tall, broad-shouldered, eyes like storm water. He did not bare teeth or bow. He studied her as one studies a wound that might heal. "You broke the circle," he said. "That makes you hunted." His name was Kalen Frostmere, and he carried the smell of iron and snow. He wore a cloak stitched with old sigils and scars that told their own stories. He did not kneel, and he did not threaten. He offered bread, rough and warm, and waited. Elowyn took it with shaking hands, suspicion sharp, but hunger sharper. "The valley will send trackers, Kalen said. "And worse." He glanced at her shoulder, eyes narrowing with something like recognition. "The wolf god does not choose lightly." Elowyn swallowed. "I didn't ask," she said. Kalen's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "None of us do," he replied. He explained without explaining, letting truth surface in edges. Old covenants, broken kings, a god who bound power to protection. "If you are moonbound," he finished, "you are not a sacrifice. You are a hinge." They moved at dusk. Kalen led, silent as a shadow, Elowyn following, senses stretching to meet the forest halfway. When wolves appeared, they did not bare teeth. They paced, watchful. Kalen watched Elowyn watch them, measuring. At the river crossing, arrows hissed from the bank. Kalen shoved Elowyn down as a shaft bit into bark where her head had been. Chaos snapped tight. Elowen felt the presence surge, not rage, but focus. She stood, lifted her hand, and the river answered, swelling just enough to sweep the attacker's footing away. Silence crashed in after. Kaelin stared, breath fogging. "You felt it," he said softly. Elowen nodded, terrified and alive. From the far bank, a horn sounded, the valley's call. Kaelin drew his blade. "They're coming," he said. Elowen set her jaw, eyes silvering in the falling light. "Then," she answered, "we don't run." The horn's cry rippled across the river like a wound reopening. Elowen stood at the water's edge, boots soaked, breath steaming, and felt the weight of choice settle into her bones. Kaelin's blade caught the last light of dusk, steady in his grip, his stance loose but ready. From the trees came movement, dark shapes, leather creaking, the sharp smell of oil and iron, valley trackers sworn to return what the priest's name lost. Elowen's heart hammered, but the panic no longer owned her. The wolf god's presence pressed close, not guiding her hands, only bracing her spine. She raised her chin as the first men broke from cover, faces hard with duty and fear. "Elowen Vale," one called, voice cracking. "By covenant you are bound." The words slid off her like rain. When an arrow flew, she did not flinch. The wind shifted instead, tipping its path into the river. Surprise flashed. Kaelin moved, fast and precise, disarming one attacker without killing. Elowen felt the power coil, waiting for her will. They fought their way into the forest, not fleeing, but cutting a path. Elowen learned in flashes how to listen to roots before stepping, how to breathe with the ground so it held firm. The presence warmed when she chose restraint, and sharpened when she chose resolve. A tracker lunged, eyes wild, shouting her sister's name as if it were a shield. Elowen caught his wrist, felt the tremor of his fear, and let him go. "Tell them," she said, voice steady. "I am not theirs." He ran. When the forest swallowed the last of the pursuit, Elowen sagged against a tree, chest burning. Kaelin studied her, not as a weapon, but as a person bearing too much. "You chose mercy," he said. "That matters." She wiped blood from her knuckles, unsure whose it was. "So does survival," she replied. The wolves emerged then, circling close, eyes reflecting starlight, not hostile. Curious, almost protective. They reached Frostmere by dawn, a ridge of stone overlooking a basin of mist and water. It was not a fortress, but a living place. Timber halls, smoke rising gentle, people moving with purpose. Elowen felt eyes on her, not cruel but wary. Children paused their chores to stare. Elders leaned on staffs carved with moon motifs. Kaelin spoke for her briefly. Elowen spoke for herself briefly. She slept after, exhaustion dragging her under like a tide. Dreams found her anyway. She stood in a forest older than names, the wolf god beside her, vast and quiet. "They will test you," the presence said, "and you will test yourself." She woke with a start to voices raised outside. An elder woman, hair silvered and braided tight, argued that gods always demanded payment. Elowen sat up, heart thudding, and stepped into the hall before Kaelin could stop her. "If there is a debt," she said, "name it to me." The room stilled. The elder met her gaze. "Protection," she said, "without cruelty." Training began that day, not with blades, but with balance. Elowen learned to ground power without letting it burn through her. She learned the cost of reaching too far, headaches like thunder, hands trembling. Kaelin stayed close, not instructing unless asked. In the evenings, they shared bread and quiet. He told her of kings who wore crowns and forgot their people, of gods who stepped back when humans learned to listen. She told him of Marid, how love curdled into rivalry under pressure, how she still hoped her sister might choose differently. One night, under a low moon, Elowen followed the pull into the trees and shifted, not into a wolf, but into something in between. Taller, stronger, senses flaring bright. Panic flared too until Kaelin's voice anchored her. "Breathe," he said. She did and held the shape, then let it. Then Go. When she sagged, he caught her. The moment lingered. Heat, trust, something unspoken. The test came sooner than expected. Smoke rose from the basin at noon. A caravan burned, people scattering. At its center stood the high priest, alive, staff reforged, eyes burning with certainty. Beside him, Marid stepped forward in white, gone gray, jaw set, fear hidden behind faith. Return, the priest called, or watch them suffer? Elowin felt the old ache twist, sharper now with stakes. The wolf god stirred, not urging, waiting. Kaelin's hand hovered near his blade, but he did not move. Elowin stepped into the open, heart loud, voice clear. I will stand between, she said. The ground answered. The mist rose. Wolves gathered. Mared's eyes flickered, doubt, envy, something like grief. The priest lifted his staff. Power surged toward Elowin like a tide meant to drown. She planted her feet and met it, choosing not to destroy, but to hold. The clash cracked the air. As light and shadow collided, Elowin realized the truth the valley feared. The Moonbound Bride was not ending a story. She was beginning one, and everyone would have to choose which side they stood on. The clash did not end in fire. It ended in stillness so complete, Elowin could hear the river stones shifting beneath the mist. She stood between the caravan and the priest, arms trembling as she held the pressure of his will without letting it break into violence. The staff hummed, hungry. The presence within her steadied, a cool hand at her spine. Hold, it whispered. Not command, but counsel. Faces hovered at the edge of the fog. Traders clutching bundles, children crying into sleeves. Frostmere's people tense and ready. Kaelin stepped forward, blade low, eyes never leaving the priest. Enough, he said. The word landed like a door slammed shut. Elowin felt the moment when restraint could tip into ruin. She exhaled, long and careful, and bled the power into the ground. The earth drank it, roots knitting tight. The staff dimmed. The priest staggered, shocked. For the first time, Elowin saw fear in his certainty. Mared's voice cut through the hush. You're lying to them, she said to Elowin, to herself, to anyone listening. Her white cloak was stained with ash. Her hands shook despite the careful set of her shoulders. You always wanted this, she continued, words tumbling. To be special, to be seen. The old wound opened, clean and sharp. Elowin met her sister's gaze and did not look away. I wanted to be safe, she said quietly. So did you. Murmurs rippled. The priest snapped for silence, rage flaring, but Elowin lifted a hand, and the wolves answered, stepping closer without growls. She turned back to the priest. Leave, she said. Take your faith and go. He laughed, brittle. The god will consume you, he spat. Elowin felt the presence stir, calm as stone. No, she replied. It chose me to protect. The priest retreated with threats sharpened into promises, Mared following, eyes burning with something unresolved. The caravan was saved, but the cost lingered. That night Frostmere gathered. Elders spoke of consequences, of valleys that do not forget defiance. Elowin listened, weighed, answered. She did not promise victory. She promised effort. The elder woman with the tight braids studied her and nodded once. Training changed after that. It grew harsher, shorter, more real. Elowin learned to call the power without losing herself, to shape it small and precise. Kaelin sparred with her, sweat and breath and bruises, teaching without pride. When she faltered, he steadied her elbow. When she overreached, he stopped her. In quiet moments, they shared laughter like contraband, soft and quick. The bond between them grew, not declared, not claimed, earned. Weeks passed. Scouts brought word. The valley was dividing. Some whispered Elowin's name with hope. Others sharpened blades. One. Dawn Elowin woke to the presence pressing close. Urgent. There is a crown that must break, it said, showing her an image, an altar beneath the old keep. Bones stacked into false holiness. The priest's power was not his faith. It was theft. Elowin called the council. We end this, she said, voice steady. Kaelin nodded. Frostmere moved. They traveled by night, wolves flanking, mist hiding footsteps. At the keep, traps snapped and failed as the ground shifted beneath Eloin's will. In the altar chamber, the priest waited, staff blazing, Mareed beside him, pale and rigid. "Choose," the priest hissed at Mareed. Eloin stepped forward. "You don't have to," she said. Silence stretched. Then Mareed dropped the knife. The staff cracked as Eloin struck, not to kill, but to unmake the lie. The bones fell to dust. The keep emptied of power like a lung emptied of air. The priest collapsed, ordinary and small. Dawn broke clean. People gathered, stunned, as Eloin stood among ruins and spoke, not as a god's mouth, but as herself. "No more sacrifices," she said. "No more chosen to suffer so others feel safe." The valley listened because the ground listened. Mareed wept, not forgiven yet, but alive to begin. Frostmere returned home without pursuit. On the ridge at sunset, Kaelin stood beside Eloin, wind tugging their cloaks. "What now?" he asked. Eloin looked out over the basin, the people moving, the wolves pacing gentle arcs. The presence warmed, content. "Now," she said, "we build." And as the moon rose, not judgmental but bright, Eloin felt the truth settle. She was moonbound, yes, but bound to hope, to hard choices, to a future she would shape with her own hands. The valley did not heal overnight. Eloin learned that truth in the smallest things, the way some doors stayed closed when she passed, the way voices dipped into whispers before rising again. Power could break altars, but trust moved slower. She walked amongst the people anyway, boots dusty, sleeves rolled, helping where hands were needed. She carried water, mended fences, listened more than she spoke. Each night, the wolf god's presence rested quieter now, no longer urgent, as if watching what she would do when no miracle was required. Kaelin stayed near, not guarding, simply present. They sparred at dawn, trained at dusk, shared silence under the moon. In those quiet hours, Eloin felt the weight of leadership settle heavier than any chain. She was not afraid of enemies anymore. She was afraid of failing the people who had begun to believe. The first real test came with winter's edge. Snow crept early, biting crops before harvest finished. Hunger threatened, the old fear returning like a bruise pressed too hard. The council argued, store grain or share it, fortify Frostmere or send aid to the valley that once bound her. Eloin listened, heart pulling in two directions. Memory rose unbidden, her mother counting coins, her father's, cracked hands. She stood and chose. "We share," she said, "and we teach how to endure." Some protested. She did not waver. Frostmere's hunters doubled their efforts. Eloin went with them, learning roots, lifting fallen trees, using power sparingly to shield rather than dominate. When the first caravan reached the valley with food and firewood, the whispers changed. Not to praise, never that easy, but to possibility. At the river crossing, Eloin met resistance not with force, but with truth. "You think I came back to rule you," she said to a crowd gathered tight against the cold. "I came back because no one should starve while another eats in fear." A man spat doubt. A woman stepped forward with a child bundled too thin and said nothing at all. Eloin felt the presence stir, approving not of power, but of choice. That night she dreamed of a crown melting into water, of hands passing it along, of a path that widened when walked together. She woke with resolve, sharpened into steel. The Moonbound Bride would not sit on a throne. She would stand in the cold with everyone else. Kaelin watched her change and did not interfere. He admired the way she held herself now, still gentle, but unyielding. One evening, after a day of hauling timber until their arms shook, he spoke the question he'd carried too long. "What happens when they stop needing you?" Eloin smiled, tired and real. "Then I'll have done my job." The answer settled something between them. Under a sky scattered with hard stars, they stood close without touching, a future unspoken, but breathing. Far off, wolves howled, not a warning this time, but a chorus. Elowen closed her eyes and listened, knowing the story was not cresting yet. Winter was coming, and with it, a reckoning that would demand more than power. Winter arrived like a held breath finally released. Snow fell thick and sudden, burying paths and softening the world into quiet danger. Elowen woke before dawn to the sound of bells, warning, not celebration. A messenger knelt in the yard, frost clinging to his lashes. The southern pass had collapsed. A village beyond it was trapped, supplies low, sickness spreading. The council looked to Elowen, some with hope, some with doubt sharpened by fear. She felt the familiar pull to act fast, to burn a path through stone and snow. The wolf god's presence hovered, attentive. Power can open roads, it murmured. But roads kept open require hands. Elowen nodded, decision already made. We go, she said. Not with miracles first, with people. Kaelin met her gaze, approval clear. Teams formed, sleds packed, herbs bundled. Elowen took the lead, boots crunching into white, breath a steady cloud, resolve firm. The pass was worse than the message promised. Rock and ice had fused into a wall, wind cutting like knives. Some faltered. Elowen did not raise her hand. She set to work, digging, hauling, singing a rhythm to keep hands moving. When fingers numbed, she warmed them with shared breath, not magic. Only when the wall threatened to slide again did she step forward, pressing her palm to stone and whispering balance into it, just enough to hold. Hours stretched. Pain sang in her muscles. At last, a narrow way opened. Cheers died quick in the wind. On the far side, the village waited. Smoke thin, doors barred against cold. Children watched with hollow eyes. Elowen felt anger flare at the old systems that had abandoned them. She swallowed it and knelt instead, listening to coughs, counting stores, learning names. She promised nothing she could not give. Sickness spread faster than snow. Elowen worked through the nights, grinding herbs, boiling water, learning which houses needed heat first. Kaelin took shifts without complaint, hauling wood, standing guard, coaxing laughter from children with small feats of balance and strength. When a fever spiked and a child's breath hitched, panic surged. Elowen reached and stopped. Herself. The presence waited, patient. She remembered restraint. She guided warmth into the room, not into the child's blood. The fever broke on its own by morning. Relief broke something open in her chest. Leadership, she realized, was knowing when not to be the answer. Word spread. Trust deepened. Not loud, but solid. The test came at dusk on the fourth day. Scouts burst in, breathless. Armed men approached from the valley. Remnants of the priest's followers, hungry and angry, seeking stores. Elowen felt the old pull to stand alone. She did not. She called the village together, spoke plain. They will try to take, she said. We will not kill for grain. We will defend together. Hands rose. Fear remained, but it shared space with resolve. When the attackers arrived, Elowen stepped forward with empty palms. The ground hummed beneath her boots, ready but restrained. There is food, she said. Enough if we share work. Laughter answered. A blade flashed. Kaelin moved, disarming without blood. Villagers surged, blocking paths, protecting stores. Elowen held the line, shaping fear into firmness. After a tense hour, the attackers retreated, empty-handed and shaken. The village stood, surprised at itself. That night, Elowen climbed the ridge alone, snow whispering underfoot. The presence rose beside her, vast and quiet. You chose the harder way, it said. Again. She looked out over the lights below, small and brave. I'm afraid, she admitted. So are they, the presence replied. And still they follow. Elowen exhaled, letting the truth settle. When she returned, Kaelin waited, cloak wrapped tight, eyes warm. He did not ask what she had seen. He handed her a cup of broth and stood close enough to share heat. In that shared warmth, Elowen felt the path ahead clarify. The valley would test her again. Winter would not be kind, but she was no longer walking alone, and neither were they. The thaw came wrong. It arrived too early, tearing. Winter's careful stitches and turning roads into rivers of mud. Elowen sensed the imbalance before the scouts reported it, the ground restless, the stream swollen with hurry. Frostmere's elders argued omens. Elowen listened and felt the wolf god's presence stir, uneasy. The land is pushed, it warned. Not broken, yet. Then came the second message. The old dam above the low fields had cracked. If it failed, homes would drown. Elowen did not call for ceremony. She called for ropes, shovels, hands. Kaelin was already moving, barking quiet orders, eyes scanning the sky. The march down the ridge was a blur of slipping boots and shouted warnings. When they reached the dam, water hissed through new seams like breath through teeth. Panic rippled. Elowen stepped onto the slick stone, heart loud. She felt the pull to seal it whole, to pour power until stone obeyed. The presence pressed back. Anchor. Don't command. She swallowed and nodded. They worked in waves. Elowen coordinated, placing teams where pressure eased, sending runners to redirect flow. She braced the worst seam with timber and stone, palms burning as she whispered steadiness into the rock. Just enough to hold, not enough to scar the land. Kaelin took the most dangerous position, waist deep in freezing water, hammering braces into place while others hauled. When a brace snapped, he nearly vanished beneath the surge. Elowen lunged, catching his cloak, muscles screaming. For a heartbeat, fear flared bright and selfish. She did not pull with power. She pulled with everything human she had. Together, they dragged him free. Cheers cut through the roar. The dam held. Not perfect. Holding. News traveled faster than the water receded. The valley gathered in the low fields, watching the repaired wall with awe and doubt braided tight. Elowen addressed them, soaked and shaking, refusing a platform. "This will fail if we leave it," she said. "So we won't." She laid out plans, rotations, repairs, shared stores. No miracles promised. People nodded, some reluctantly, but they nodded. As the crowd thinned, Myriad appeared at the edge. Cloak simple now, eyes tired. She asked to speak. Elowen agreed, alone. Myriad confessed fear, jealousy, the long habit of choosing safety even when it hurt others. She asked for a place to work, not forgiveness. Elowen gave her a shovel and a schedule. It was not reconciliation. It was a beginning. That night, the wolf god came closer than ever, the air thick with moonlight, though the sky was clouded. "You bind yourself to them," it said, not accusing. "I bind myself to your choices." Elowen felt the weight and the gift of it. "What happens when I choose wrong?" she asked. "Then you learn," the presence replied, "and so do they." The truth steadied her more than praise. She returned to Frostmere with plans etched into her mind, sleep a luxury she postponed. Kaelin found her on the steps before dawn, exhaustion mirrored in his eyes. "You don't have to carry all of it," he said. Elowen looked at him, really looked, and let herself lean, just for a moment. He steadied her without claiming more. The reckoning arrived with a rider bearing a black seal. The Valley's council demanded Elowen submit to binding, to protect the peace. Refusal meant war. Elowen read the letter twice, then burned it. She called the council and spoke plainly. "We won't kneel," she said. "We won't strike first. We will stand." The decision split the room and then knit it stronger. Preparations began. Defenses reinforced, routes mapped. Children moved to safety. Elowen trained harder, learned faster, feeling the presence sharpen when she needed it and fade when she didn't. As the moon rose, pale and watchful, Elowen stood at the ridge and felt the future press close. The Moonbound Bride was done being chosen by others. The choice ahead would be hers, and it would decide everything. The first clash did not come with horns or banners. It came with smoke. Farms at the valley's edge burned at dawn, fires set to force Elowen's hand. The smell reached Frostmere before the messengers did, bitter and accusing. Elowen stood on the ridge, Fists clenched, watching black plumes bruise the sky. Rage surged, hot and tempting. The wolf god's presence tightened, alert. "This is the blade meant to make you swing," it warned. Elowen breathed through it, tasting ash, and turned to her people. "We protect lives," she said, "not pride." Teams moved fast, buckets, sleds, windbreaks. Elowen ran with them, boots slipping, power humming low as she bent gusts away from thatch roofs and pulled moisture from the air just enough to slow the flames. When she reached a burning barn, she found children trapped inside, crying. Without thinking, she plunged through smoke, wrapped them in her cloak, and carried them out one by one. Applause did not matter. Their breathing did. The valley forces revealed themselves by noon, lines of armed men forming beyond the fields, banners stiff with old symbols. At their center rode a new leader, Lord Arcton, broad and polished, eyes sharp with calculation. He raised a hand, and the fires ceased, smoke curling into uneasy quiet. "You force our hand," he called. "Submit, and we restore order." Elowen stepped forward alone, mud streaked on her face, eyes steady. "Order built on fear breaks," she answered. Murmurs rippled through both lines. Arcton smiled thinly. "So does mercy." The first arrows flew, not aimed to kill, but to scatter. Elowen lifted her palm, and the ground rose in a low ridge, shafts thudding harmlessly. Kaelin's voice rang out, steadying the defenders. The clash held at a breath's distance, tension stretched so tight it sang. Night fell heavy and wet. Elowen walked the lines, listening to fear, offering truth instead of promises. She felt the presence close, urgent now, the dam, the thaw, the fires. Images flashed. Pressure. Building, a plan not of steel but of water. Elowen called Kaelin and the elders. She spoke quietly, quickly. Risk weighed against cost. They agreed. Before dawn, Elowen moved with a small team upriver, rain masking footsteps. At the old spillway, she knelt, hands numb, and whispered balance into stone and current, shaping release. Not a flood, but a truth the land had been holding back. Water surged down the channels, spreading wide, cutting supply routes, turning siege into scramble without drowning a single home. When valley forces woke to mud and hunger, their certainty cracked. Arton rode out furious, demanding battle. Elowen met him knee-deep in water, cloak heavy, eyes bright. "This ends now," she said. He scoffed and charged. Kaelin intercepted, steel ringing, the fight fast and brutal. Elowen felt the old pull to end it with power. She did not. She held the ground steady while Kaelin disarmed Arcton and kicked his sword away. Silence fell thick as rain. Elowen addressed, both sides, voice carrying. "We can keep breaking each other," she said, "or we can build something that doesn't need chains." Faces shifted, some turned away, others stepped forward. The battle dissolved, not in victory cries, but in exhausted agreement. As the lines broke, Marita appeared beside Elowen, soaked and shaking. "I told them the truth," she said. Elowen nodded, accepting the small, brave step. The wolf god's presence settled, approving without triumph. "You chose restraint when conquest was easier," it said. "That is why you endure." Elowen watched people wade home through shallow water, alive. The moon rose pale behind clouds. The final reckoning still waited, she knew. The council would not fade quietly. But something had shifted. The valley had seen another way. And Elowen, Moonbound Bride, felt the story bend toward an ending that would not be written in blood. The summons came at dawn, carried by a white flag that fluttered like a held breath. The Valley Council demanded Elowen's presence at the old circle, the same stones where chains had once bitten her wrists. Refusal, the messenger said, would be taken as admission of guilt. Elowen read the words without shaking. This was the reckoning the wolf god had warned of, the moment when restraint would be tested harder than power. She did not call an army. She chose Kaelin, 2 elders, and Mered. "If this ends," she said quietly, "it ends where it began." The path down felt heavier than any march, memory pressing in with every step. When the circle appeared, scrubbed, clean but unchanged, Elowyn tasted iron in the air. The council stood waiting, faces set, Lord Arcton among them, bandaged and bitter. They spoke of law, of balance, of fear dressed as responsibility. They accused Elowyn of disrupting trade, of weakening authority, of placing the valley at risk by refusing to be bound. When she answered, she did not deny the disruption. She named it. What you call order, she said, voice steady, was built on silence and sacrifice. I was meant to disappear so you could feel safe. Murmurs swelled. The high priest's successor stepped forward, producing a relic, silver and rune etched, meant to bind. By covenant, he intoned, submit. Elowyn felt the presence surge, vast and watchful. Power coiled, ready to shatter stone and crown alike. She lifted her hand and lowered it. No, she said. I will not trade one chain for another. The council moved to seize her. Kaelin stepped in, blade half drawn. Elowyn shook her head. She stepped into the circle alone. The moon slid from cloud, bright as truth. Elowyn knelt, not in submission, but in grounding, and pressed her palm to the earth. She opened herself, not to command, but to witness. The ground answered, memories rising like breath. Old floods diverted by shared labor, winters survived by open hands, children protected by neighbors when rulers failed. The circle glowed, not with dominance, but with recognition. Gasps rippled. The relic cracked in the priest's grasp. Elowyn stood, eyes silvered, voice carrying beyond the stones. The wolf god did not choose me to rule you, she said. It chose me to remind you who you are when you choose each other. Something broke then, not stone but certainty. Arton fell to his knees, not from force, but from the weight of being seen. Others followed, some in relief, some in grief. The council's power collapsed into argument, then into surrender. Elowyn did not claim a throne. She named a charter instead, shared stores, rotating councils, protections written into practice. The circle dimmed, satisfied. The presence withdrew a step, proud and distant. As the crowd dispersed, Kaelin found her shaking, the aftershock of restraint heavier than any blow. He wrapped his cloak around her without asking. The valley exhaled, the war that might have been ended without a single death. Elowyn looked at the stones then, at the path home, knowing only one chapter remained, and it would be the hardest of all. The valley woke to a different quiet, not the silence of fear, but the hush that follows a storm when the ground is rinsed clean. Elowyn stood at the edge of Frostmere as dawn spilled gold across wet fields, the old circle far behind her now, its power spent and settled. Messengers moved along the roads, carrying copies of the charter, not orders, agreements. People read them aloud in kitchens and barns, arguing, laughing, testing the words against their lives. Some scoffed, many nodded. Change never arrived all at once, but it had arrived. Elowyn felt the wolf god's presence recede further, not abandoning her, but loosening its grip like a teacher stepping back. You no longer need me to stand, it said. She swallowed the ache that came with that truth and answered aloud, Stay close anyway. Warmth brushed her thoughts, amused and fond. Rebuilding took weeks. Elowyn refused. Titles, choosing work instead. She hauled stone for the dam's final repairs, hands blistered and honest. She sat with elders and farmers, translating fear into plans. When disputes flared, she listened until the heat burned off and only need remained. Mered worked beside her, quieter now, steadier. They spoke little of the past, letting action do what words could not. One evening, as the moon rose gentle and round, Mered stopped beside Elowyn and said simply, Thank you for not leaving me behind. Elowyn nodded, the answer carried in the shared weight of the stones they lifted together. Forgiveness did not erase scars. It taught them how to move with them. On the first full moon after the charter, the wolves gathered on the ridge, not howling, but watching. Elowyn felt the old pull and answered it, stepping into the trees alone. She shifted, not fully, not fearfully, finding the shape that fit her now. Stronger, clearer. She ran until breath and earth matched pace, until joy startled a laugh from her chest. When she returned, Kalen waited, as he always seemed to now, firelight softening the lines of his face. He did not speak at first. He simply held out his hand. Elowen took it, feeling the steady truth of him. "What will you do?" he asked gently, "when they no longer look to you first?" Elowen smiled, certain. "I'll look beside them." The choice came without ceremony. Elowen and Kylan stood before the people at dusk, hands linked, not claiming crowns, but naming a partnership, not a ruling, an anchoring. Frostmere cheered, the valley answered, and the sound rolled through the basin like a promise kept. That night, under a sky scrubbed clean, Elowen felt the wolf god one last time, close and approving. "Moonbound Bride," it said, the title no longer heavy. You were chosen, and you chose back. The presence faded into the land, into the breath of wolves and the patience of stone. Years later, children would ask why the valley changed, why no one wore silver chains anymore, why councils listened. They would hear the story of a girl who stood in a circle and refused to disappear, who learned that power used gently could outlast power used loud. Elowen Vale would hear the story too, told with exaggeration and warmth, and smile at the truth beneath it. She would walk the roads she helped open, boots dusty, hands free, knowing the moon would always rise, and that she had taught a valley how to rise with it. If this story moved you, don't leave quietly. Take a second to like this video so more people can find it. Subscribe to the channel if you love emotional, cinematic stories that stay with you long after they end. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it stands, chooses, and refuses to disappear. And tell me in the comments, which moment stayed with you the most and why?